Welcome to Cars on Call. I'm automotive journalist and gastroenterologist Steve Schutz. I'm here with trauma surgeon Stephan Moran, who's got his trauma surgeon safety topic, which again that differentiates us from other podcasts. I always try to get that out of the way first, Stephan, because it's very cool. The stuff you talk about, your expertise, your experience. Everybody loves hearing about it. Any feedback I get, they're like, "What about Stephan?" And I'm like, hey, what about Steve? But they don't care about Steve. They care about Stephan and his stories. And Adam Hudson, everyone likes to hear about your car collecting and your car consulting and your historical stuff. So hey guys, welcome. I know you're both connected to Alabama. I'll just say very quickly, Alabama over Auburn. It's always a good game. This one was really special.
Epic,
incredible game. Adams, you must be excited.
Oh, rather shocking. We attended church immediately thereafter.
Yeah.
It was just unbelievable. You couldn't have written that any more strangely of an ending. And it was a good game, fought very hard to the very end.
Talk about Thanksgiving. Yeah, we got a really special guest. So we got a couple things to get through that we're not going to spend too much time on because Carole is here and Stephan will introduce her. But we've talked about you, Carole, your Corvette and your driving experiences and racing experiences in France. So we're going to hear from Carole. And Stephan, just say a word about who she is. We'll introduce her later, but just say who she is quickly.
Well, Carole is a dear friend. She's basically family. We're the third generation. Our kids will be the fourth generation of family friends. And my grandmother knew her grandparents. This just passed down through the generation. Many of the car memories I've talked about on this show have been in France, and several of them, and I'll tell one story again later on the show with Carole. So I've been trying to get her on the show. She flew over for Thanksgiving to spend with our family, and the one-year birthday of my brother's daughter, who is named after Carole with a middle name. So proud to have her here, and we look forward to interviewing her later on the show.
I hope you meet your brother's granddaughter.
Yes, I did what I said. Yeah, I don't know. Okay.
I hope so.
Got a little late start, did he?
Well, yeah. Steve-O's the editor. See, other people, Steve-O and my wife are the only people point out when I say things like that make mistakes. Other people just let it go, but Steve always has to point it out.
Well, someone's going to say, wait a second.
He just says it.
And we'll get through a couple orders of business before we get to Carole. I'm extremely excited to talk to Carole, but we have to talk about a couple of things. Number one, this is 5 years since the arrest of Carlos Ghosn. Carlos Ghosn was the CEO of Renault and then the CEO of Nissan and then the CEO of both together. He's an incredible figure in the automotive industry. He really rose to fame with Michelin. He was CEO of Michelin North America for years. He was hired away by Renault, became VP in the late 90s of Renault purchasing and manufacturing. Renault was notoriously unprofitable back in the 80s and 90s, especially the 90s, and they really were kind of on the edge of survival. Renault, Carlos Ghosn came in and he was known as Le Cost Cutter. And he came in, cut their costs, made them profitable again, and was promptly, and by promptly, I mean about 3 years after he was made vice president, he was CEO of Renault. So around 2000 or so. And then he became, again, CEO of Nissan and the Renault Nissan companies that had an alliance. They were not merged, and that's critical to mention. So he was CEO for about 18 years. I'll just say parenthetically, I think a CEO should be CEO for about 10 years. I think once you get past 10 years, good things tend to not happen. And that certainly was the case for Carlos Ghosn. He was summoned by the board to Tokyo in November of 2018. He got off his private jet and he was arrested. He was arrested for theft and fraud and incredible. He never stole any money, but they said he had a conspiracy to steal money.
Yeah, he spent a lot. He spent a lot of their money. He threw quite a 60th birthday party in France, lavished millions. So he was a little free with the pocketbook.
You're absolutely right, and we'll talk about that. But he was arrested. He spent 13 months in jail. And then suddenly in December of 2019, he was gone. Ghosn was gone. And he escaped in a music box, something like what we're showing here. And he escaped to Lebanon, which does not have an extradition treaty with either France or Japan. And of course, he's wanted on charges in both those countries, and he remains a fugitive today. He went from one of the most famous and revered executives of any industry in the world to right now a wanted fugitive. So, Stephan, talk more about that, because he was definitely perceived as, number one, a very successful man, but number two, a spender.
He was a big spender, and he had a tendency to spend money from the coffers of the company on his home, on his parties, perhaps on some vehicles, and just lavish and free flowing with what was an expense as the CEO of the company. And it caught up to him. Of course, the Japanese weren't happy about it. It's all very fishy, but I think the one thing that's interesting to me is, he hired an American to get him out, who was a former military guy. That got him out in this basically a case that you'd have musical instruments packed in. The father and son that got him out spent 1.5 years in jail. About $1.5 million in legal fees. Carlos Ghosn has paid none of those fees or helped him in any way. He has not been contrite. He still, to this day, pleads 100% innocent. And he apparently, in the new Netflix drama coming out, does not come out or over as well as he would like people to think of him. That it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to the documentary.
All right, before I launch, Adam, you must have thoughts.
Well, I'm interested to hear his story, but you don't often, if you're completely innocent, you would rarely put yourself inside an aluminum box and send yourself to Lebanon. It just seems an interesting way to declare your innocence. Obviously, the Netflix documentary that I'm super looking forward to too, it would have been scripted and edited by him. Just answer the questions. If you're so innocent, just answer the questions. It's interesting. I was reading that he is teaching in Lebanon, and he's teaching some version of entrepreneurialism.
Embezzlement 101.
What's that?
Oh
Embezzlement 101.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and how to make music these equipment boxes more comfortable for long hauls, probably. But it's a very, very interesting tale. It sounds larger than life. It is larger than life. A couple of things that he lavished himself with was a little wedding party thrown at Versailles in 2016, and then he promptly buys himself a 120-foot boat. So, a CEO is entitled to the perks and benefits that come with that job. I've always thought it was a little odd that he had 2 CEO-ships with companies that could have been competing with each other. I never fully understood that, but yeah, the story's interesting nonetheless.
All right. Well, to fill in the details, he was under house arrest, so he was not in an actual jail, although he spent a lot of time in jail. Solitary confinement, lights on 24/7. We could talk about the Japanese legal system, which I want to say a few words about. And then he was under house arrest. And it was when he was under house arrest, he was free to leave, but he couldn't leave the country. But he left one day and got on a train, went to Kyoto, got on a private jet. And interestingly, he chose Kyoto to fly out of because they did not have a X-ray machine large enough to scan the box that he was in. So that's why he didn't leave from Tokyo. But he got on a private jet, flew to Turkey, and then off to Lebanon, where he remains today. By the way, I know all about that innocent and stuff like that. But if you are tried for any crime in Japan, you have a 1% chance of being found not guilty. I think it's a very bad legal system. It is almost certain you're going to be convicted and you're going to spend serious time. Number one. Number two, he was never accused of stealing money. He never stole money. He had some type of deferred compensation program, a regimen that was set up for him. He was paid, even though he got a lot of money, he was paid significantly less than any American automotive CEO. And he got this deferred compensation plan approved by the board. It was set up by a guy named Greg Kelly, who was a CFO of Nissan. And that's the key is, again, he didn't steal money. Number one. Number two, if you do something wrong in the corporate world, you get fired. That's how it's done. You don't get arrested. You do something violent or a crime, yeah, arrest the guy. But some kind of financial shenanigans, which again did not involve embezzlement, involved some kind of a deferred compensation plan that was too rich. You don't arrest your CEO for that. You know what happens? You lose billions of dollars in market capitalization, and there's a brain drain. That's exactly what happened to Nissan. Anyone who was not American or was not Japanese left. They had a huge loss. This, by the way, the CEO of Nissan USA used to, or of Hyundai USA used to be with Nissan. I don't want to rant here. They lost tons of money. This was a big mistake. They should have fired the guy. I think it was absolutely terrible financially for Nissan. Forget about the legalities. But again, he didn't steal any money. Did he spend lavishly? Yeah. Who doesn't if you're a CEO? A lot of CEOs spend lavishly. So there's my little rant. I think they should have never fired him. By the way, or never had him arrested. By the way, he's a teacher. You want to see a good lesson in teaching? Go to YouTube, search Carlos Ghosn, Stanford. He gave a lecture at Stanford, which is unbelievable, about how to run a car company. He went into all the details. The guy's a great teacher. He was a great CEO. So there's my rant.
That was a mouthful.
That was all right. All right. What's next, Steve?
No,
Let's
man,
move on.
You're welcome.
I'm now ready to start the rallying cry for his release. Okay.
Oh yeah, I'll say very quickly. His co-conspirator, Greg Kelly, was also arrested the same day with the same situation. He was flown to Japan, arrested. He was tried, and despite the 1% chance of being found not guilty, he was found not guilty. Basically, he was found guilty of very small crimes, did no jail time, and left the country. And he's talked about it, and he said basically this was ridiculous. And the legal system over there, bad. I would have gotten in a box myself. All right.
Well, here's a crime he didn't commit. He didn't come out with Solstice.
Car spotting. Go ahead, Adams. Talk about our car spotting, because we're getting close to getting to Carole.
Well, this particular car, Steve, you had seen one in traffic, and you said, when was the last time you saw one? And I honestly could not remember. And the Solstice was sort of the brainchild of Bob Lutz, who had gone into recent-ish retirement from Chrysler, pretty much a product czar there. The man knows style, he knows product, he knows how to sell. He came out with this car, I think, at the International Auto Show in 05, the American International Auto Show in 05. And he put it out there, and it was such an incredible buzz, and there was a lot of interest surrounding this car. They sold their entire 2006 production in 10 days. And this is what he was hoping to do, is build a little romance, a little fire, a little spark around a revived product line. And Pontiac at that time was thought to be sort of the performance arm of GM. And this particular car, not so super performance snazzy. It had a whole 177 horsepower out of an inline four-cylinder, a 2.4, an oversized four-cylinder. But it was the first car with direct injection that GM had ever offered. It had a very elaborate frame, built sort of like a smaller Corvette, if you can believe that. And that this little car did okay. And then they added some performance options to it. They had a GXP package that pumped power. They had a twin scroll. There you go. And there's the crazy coupe. I mean, this is one you really don't see. The coupe version had a 260 horse motor, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it only weighed like 2,800 pounds, so it was fast enough. You could get a dealer option on this car to pump it to 290 horsepower, which at that time was the highest specific horsepower per liter GM had ever made. And it's a pretty impressive amount of power out of that small of a motor. And we had a little thing called a financial crisis that hit everybody in 2008. And by 2009, this car and all of Pontiac were done. Little overreaction by GM, some might call it, but there you go.
Well, you forgot this one here, Adams. Look at this
I
thing.
did forget that one.
Oh,
I only I only included that for our shooting brake fan. Steph, what's your take on that unit?
Look like one of the cars from the Munsters TV show. This is terrible looking. So listen, this is a Solstice with a hard top station wagon thrown on the back of it. It's worse than the Pulsar NX station wagon.
Yeah, it's crazy. It took a fairly good looking. I think the Solstice was kind of good looking, and its stablemate, the Saturn Sky. Opel offered one in Europe. But yeah, the little shooting brake version, it just sort of looks like it has a little bit of a Viper-esque look to it, but it looks like the Viper's chubby little sister. I can't quite figure out what it's trying to be. And I normally like that profile, but it just doesn't work on that car. But they sold about 65,000 of the convertibles and a whopping 1,300 of the coupes. So those cars are relatively sought after. Spend your money as you want. It would have cost you about 35 grand new in 2009. It'll cost you the same 35 grand to get one today with low miles.
Yeah, I think it's a good looking car. They never made the shooting brake, of course, but the coupe, I've never seen a coupe in the wild, but the Solstice is a cool car. The reason I think it's really interesting is that when Bob Lutz first went to Chrysler and he had to revitalize them, he came out with the Viper. That was his idea. Just take the Dodge truck engine, put it in a convertible, and it revitalized Dodge. And he had the same idea for Pontiac when he went to GM. Let's give him a convertible, see what happens. It'll be fun. It'll be sporty. And the global financial crisis killed Pontiac, which is a shame. So yeah, very, very cool car to talk about. And let's move on to Carole and Stephan. Please introduce our very, very special guest. We're very excited to have her.
We really do have a special guest today. This is Carole Gratzmuller. And the little French accent I have left.
You want to say that one more time?
Carole Gratzmuller. Now let her say it. You say
I bet
it,
it sounds better when she says it.
You say it.
Carole Gratzmuller.
There we go.
Better.
So, you've heard about my French origins on this podcast, and Carole goes all the way back to the beginnings. So her grandfather started an inventor and an engineer and started a big company in Paris. She can tell you more about that company, but they had a summer home in the town of Le Vaudreuil, which is where my mother grew up. So my grandmother knew her grandparents, and then of course my Carole's father was friends with my mother, and then my father in turn, and then they had children, and my parents had children, were friends, and then the next generation is friends. Well, part of Claude, Carole's father, was a real automotive enthusiast, had a very large car collection, and liked to drive. And my mother tells stories about riding around with Claude in his fast cars. But when I remember told the story when I was 13 and went to France for the first time, I rode with Claude in the back of his Maserati Quattroporto. And that's when he had smoke in the Dunhills in the front. We couldn't talk. He's driving. And then over the years, we'd see Claude's various cars at the time. And then Carole became an enthusiast. She came to the United States, got her MBA at FSU. She lived with my parents, so she's not only a sister, but she's a daughter in the Moran family. And then she took over CEO and president of Ed Industry, the company that her grandfather started, and her father ran as well. And then she is an automotive enthusiast herself, drives one of the coolest cars probably in all of France in rallies. And then I'll finish with this. This is probably one of the first years that Carole has not done the Richard Mille Rallye de Princesse, because she's the former 6-time victor, and it's time for somebody else to win the rally. So she is not rallying this year. But recently, she doesn't brag on herself. I'm going to brag on her. I got another picture up. She has been awarded the French Legion d'Honneur, which was started by Napoleon to honor French citizens who are done wonderful things for the country and industry. She's the president of a big CEO thing for female CEO leaders. She's with that. So anyway, welcome to the show, Carole Gratzmuller. Guys, and why don't Carole just tell us a little bit? I know you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's like you said, Stephan, well, first of all, the one thing you didn't say was I grew up in England when I was little. My dad worked in England. Before he joined his father at the company, he was working in England. And so I was 9 when I came back to France. And as far as I can remember, my dad never drove what we yeah, he always drove collectibles. We never thought of a Renault or a Peugeot as being a car that my father would ever drive, because we came back from England. At the time, I think he had like a Jaguar or a Daimler, but the kind that the Queen would drive in, not like your typical. And so, and then we moved to Paris, and of course, Paris, then he had the Maserati, and that one got stolen. So then he came home one day and he said, "Okay, listen, guys, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to get a normal car." And so he came back with a BMW, and then apparently the first time we drove around in that BMW, we said, "Dad, we can't be driving around in that." I mean, because he was so used to his old collectibles. But anyway, to make long story short, he didn't come back from England with all his cars, because at the time I don't think he had the money, to keep the collection. But over the years, he started building his collection back, and there were a number of cars he was interested in, and old timers, cars from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, but for some reason there were never any American cars. And I had gone to the States in the 70s, to visit with the Moran family, with my siblings. And I just thought, I fell in love with Corvettes. I mean, at the time there were C3s, the 70s, the one, but I was just like, that was my dream car. And I came back and I said, "Dad, you've got to get one." He's like, "No, I don't think so." I mean, he's not a Porsche kind of guy either, but all his cars they had something interesting, whether it be the engine, whether it be something that was, there was some kind of innovation on it, or there was always something. And it took until, I guess, about 10 or 12 years ago, and then one day he came back, he'd been to an auction, and he calls me and he says, "Okay, yeah, I want you to come down, I've got something to show you." And so I went to this place, where he was keeping his cars, and I walk in, and there's this Corvette, the C2, and he's like, "How do you like it?" And I'm like, "Wow, I love it." He says, "Well, it's yours." So after all these years,
Wow.
I got my dream car, and actually more than my dream car, because this is like it's a C2 Stingray, but it's a big block engine, so it's a great car. I love it. And I drive it on weekends. I race with it. It's needed a lot of work over the years, and it's an expensive little toy, but it's a great car. So anyway, it's no, but I grew up with cars. I mean, my dad, when we lived in England, we were always going to races on the weekends. We're going. We drove around in old cars, and it was funny. We'd get together as a family, with my brothers, my cousins, and all that. So we would all meet at the place where he kept all his cars, and my dad would hand out the keys to a number of cars, and then we, ride along to the house in the country, everybody driving an old car, and it was fun. And but one day, I guess I must have been in my 20s or 30s at the time. He's like, "Well, Carole, which car do you want to ride in?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't want to ride in a car. I want to drive one." And so he kind of looked at me like, I just said, "Why not?" And then, so he handed me the keys, and that's how it all started. And then I started racing, and I loved it, and it was, I was pretty good at it. So that's how it all started.
Wow, that's a fascinating background, this is just a question. I know this is a car-based show, but of course it's about the people as much as anything. What is the business? What is the business that your dad had that you're running now?
Okay, the business. Well, and that was another thing too. I mean, my grandfather was an engineer, my father was an engineer, and I'm not an engineer. I majored in finance, international finance. So it's a company. We manufacture hydraulic and pneumatic components, based mostly for the transport and distribution of electrical power. Also, nuclear applications, whether it be for ships or for just like power plants. And we also manufacture MIG switches, which are equipment for electrical, high power electrical laboratories. It's all little niche markets. But and so we're based in Paris. I mean, it's a small company. It's not like a very large company. We only do assembly and testing. We subcontract all the mechanical parts, and we assemble and test them, and ship them all over the world.
It does not sound niche to me, and I think your version of big or your version of small,
No,
maybe.
it's a small company. It's only 55 people is
Okay.
what I'm saying. It's not, no, it's not a big company. It's decent size, but they're all little
decent
niche
size.
markets though.
Absolutely. Well, obviously you're surrounded by parts and mechanical bits and electromagnetic bits and pneumatic bits, hydraulic bits. So I can almost see whether or not you're, classify yourself as an engineer, you have some fascination with mechanical things, as clearly your dad's raising of you sort of dictated. And I'll ask a question that Stephan generally asks guests, but he already knows it of you. What was, aside from when your dad said, okay, well, I guess I'll let you drive the car, do you have a moment where you said, I think I'm a car person. I think I'm fascinated with this beyond just the norm. What was your moment?
I don't think I have a moment. I've always been, we've always enjoyed, the cars that, we always rode with my dad. We always went places with it. So I don't think I could live without those cars. I guess I don't think I have a moment where I decided I like them. I just think that if I didn't have them, something would be missing from my life. I mean, it's more like that.
Well, you may have heard on this show that Stephan's moment was in the back of your dad's Maserati.
Right.
Yeah, well, in those days, there was no speed limit on the highways in France, and my dad was he just liked to drive very fast. He was a very good driver too, so it was it was interesting. Now it's not as much fun anymore. I mean, you can have a big engine, but you can't use it. It's just like, it's terrible. Unless you go on racetracks, which sometimes,
Right.
I love that it's a Corvette, Carole. And I don't know if you've experienced this before, but there is a predisposition to think well of French women as drivers. When I think of French women, I assume they're all drivers that really know how to drive because of Michelle Mouton. No other women that I can think of that were successful in racing. It's really a man's world still. There's no women successful drivers now in any genre that I can think of. And yet this French woman in the 80s was very successple. I don't know if you've ever met her, but
no, I never met her. I know of her, and no, I've never met her.
So yeah, I think all of us are like, oh yeah, Carole's got to be a good driver because all the women in France are like Michelle Mouton.
What I do is not speed racing, it's regularity. So it's you have to, on certain portions, you're timed, and you always have to be within a second or half a second or 1/10 of a second of the ideal time. And they make it change all the time. So it's kind of difficult. I mean, and it's not necessarily like a round number, like 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles an hour. It's like 21.2, then you go to 31.8, and then so it's they make it difficult with a lot of navigation, so that it's hard to
my follow-up question is I love Corvettes too. We've had a guest on it was a Corvette nut. I would never really want to have one, but they really are special cars. It's got to be, first of all, it's got to be very expensive to fill it up with gas, and it's got to be very hard to get parts.
It's not that hard to get parts. You just have to know the right mechanic or the right person to go to. And I now have someone that, takes good care of my car. Yes, it's very expensive to fill it up, especially in France right now.
Yeah, tell them what we got gas today coming home. And Carole, as Carole told us today, how much is it in Paris right now?
Well, it's roughly around €2 a liter. So which would make it about €8 a gallon, I guess, something like that, about $10 a gallon, I would say, 9 or 10. So
$10 a gallon in a Corvette big block.
Yeah, on those races, I fill up, fill up at noon, fill up in the, in the evening. Yes, it's a nice little ticket, but it's but the car is great. It really is. I love it. It's so over the years, I've had like a number of things happen to it, and the electrical went down one time, and I guess it's bound to happen, when you start driving it. At first you think it's nice. I mean, you get it at the auction house and they say everything's been done, and I got all the bills to show for and everything, and I'm like, okay, well, how come this went wrong, this went wrong, this went wrong? But now it runs very nicely, and I keep it not too far from where I live, and in a special place, but so I can drive it on weekends.
Well, you chose
Mostly, but it's
what is my favorite of all the Corvette series, the C2s. But when you were in the U.S. and you saw the C3s, because at that time I remember when it came out, I thought, well, wow, the future is here. You know, that particular Mako Shark body style that we called it. But as I matured in taste, maybe I haven't matured very much, but as I got older, those cars, because the C3 just hung around a little bit past its welcome, the C2s just got to be more beautiful and more rare and more special. Did your dad kind of pick the C2 on his own accord because he started liking them, or had you sort of changed the conversation a little bit, like you were appreciating them more?
I was, you know, after I first, like I said, I liked the C3 at first, but then I didn't know about the C2s at the time. Then I got to know the C2s, and I thought, no, the C2s are a lot nicer than the C3s. So I've always, and especially the one with the rear split window, you know, the 1963 model.
Yeah,
and I love that one too. I mean, I love convertibles and I love my car. I wouldn't trade it for anything, but I do love that one too, the split rear window one. And so, and then my dad was like, yeah, that one's interesting, you know, because maybe because of the split rear window, I don't know. But I guess he never found one that he liked enough, you know, to get. And I guess I never thought of getting one for myself, you know, because I was always driving one of his cars, racing, you know, like it was at a time he had a Lancia Fulvia.
Oh yeah.
So HF 1600 HF, you know, and I did a couple of rallies, you know, one that's called the Ice and Snow. So it takes place in the wintertime, you know, on snowy and icy roads, and that was kind of fun.
And it would take about 5 Fulvia engines to equal one of the Corvette engines. What, like a 1.3 or something? It was just really small.
But then you know, there was also an Austin Healey that I like, but it's with special bodywork by a guy called Lenham in Kent. And so there's only 15 of those that were made. And so, and we have one of them. So that's what I started racing with, actually. And then my dad also has a Maserati Ghibli convertible that I love.
The original Ghibli, not the renamed Ghibli, but the original.
The original Ghibli, 1969.
One of the prettiest cars ever penned.
I love that one. So that's one of my favorite. And then he also did have for a while a 1929 Alfa Romeo 6C bodywork by Zagato. And that was a beautiful car that he had entirely redone, you know, in Milano. And so and that one I also raced with, and but that was difficult to drive. That's very different, you know, with
that's really vintage.
Yes. Yeah. It definitely is. And you're very different. And at first, you know, he was teaching me to drive, and he was like, oh, you know, you're ruining this car, you know, and I'm just like, I can't drive it, you know. It's just like
no synchros.
No synchros.
Yeah, you're just having to time everything by ear.
And that year we went through the Alps, and it was just a nightmare. But you know, at the end I thought I was going to be Popeye, you know, with my arms. It was just like it was but it was fun. It was fun. I have some great pictures. And we finished 5th, you know, so we didn't do such a bad job, you know.
As is your habit.
So
it's interesting. Your father seems like a very interesting man, and I find it fascinating that he lived in England, you lived in the United States, so you've got an American car. He had English cars, Italian cars,
German cars, you know. So it was
very eclectic.
Very eclectic. Is and well, some we still have some of his cars. Maybe there's 30 left. You know, of all different Bentleys and Talbot. There's Rolls Royces. I mean, you know, I think we have most of the vintage cars left. The others, I had a Spitfire too. I like that one. And
Carole, before we get into your competition, which is fascinating, I mean, just that you have won it so many times in a row that you've sort of bowed out gracefully to probably just be maybe the spokesperson for it or to help teach. But, you know, when I think about French automobiles, and I think about, you know, the most famous race in the world in Le Mans, that the French cars are always winning the index of efficiency, which is a slightly made up class, but nonetheless, it's an index of efficiency and aerodynamics and fuel economy, etc. So I think about French automobiles in that way. So this question may be mildly ignorant. With all the focus on efficiency and lightness and sort of some interesting innovations in that world, are you the only lady in France who has ever wanted a big block Corvette?
I
Yeah.
have no idea. I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's just I don't know too many people that have one. But I mean, the big block engine anyway. I mean, you see Corvettes. I don't see too many big block Corvettes. But
Are there any others in the rally? Are there even any
there was
others?
last year. Well, last year actually, so when we won, a Corvette C3 placed third. So there
Oh,
was a
wow.
C3 on the same race.
Gotcha.
And actually, I think she's entering the race this year, so I'm hoping she'll win, because it was a bit of a battle.
Right. That's
And actually,
terrific.
and see how, I mean, it was fair because she's the one who gave me the name of the mechanic that takes care of my car now. So,
It's a little co-opetition in
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Mhm.
gotcha. That's
It's,
wonderful. Look at that.
I mean, it was always, it's a 5-day race, that one anyway. And it's, you always leave from Paris and then you usually go to the south of France. And actually, I'm pretty sure that in the days when it was speed racing, so on closed roads, I'm pretty sure Michel Mouton would have entered that race. I have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure that, back, because the what they call the Rallye des Princesses is actually what used to be the Paris Saint-Raphaël. And it was,
That's
it was,
Paris Saint Raphael
yeah.
race for the rest of us.
Yes, and so up until the 70s or 80s, it was speed racing. It wasn't regularity like it is today.
Oh, wow.
And so I'll have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure she would have won that one.
Well, I don't want to catch you off guard on an unprepared question, but I'm sure you can relay several answers to this. Just hit us with an interesting racing story, something unexpected that happened or funny or a close call or anything like that. Just anything from your very varied and storied racing background.
Well, I've had some interesting stories, like, spinning, on a racetrack and then coming face to face with another car. That would be an interesting story.
Yeah, that'll get your attention.
Definitely, it's and actually, I started laughing, but I mean, the other girl was not laughing at all. So.
What did you almost get hit by in that little incident?
No, that incident, it was a Porsche. But
Okay.
I just it was my fault. I mean, I was just hitting on the gas a little bit too much and I just went spinning, and then she was just like, this is really loud. And I'm like, yeah, but if you can't step on it, on the racetrack, it's not fun.
Right.
So so that was one interesting. But otherwise, no, sometimes coming into the middle of a field with cows, and you have to wait until the cows are gone so you can, and then you've got to make up for the time you lost. And so that's funny. That was also funny. And then sometimes, I know with having a navigation problem. So, my co-driver says, okay, make a right here. And I'm like, after a while, we're on a grass road. And I said, I don't think this is the right way. She says, no, you're right. I think we need to turn around. But, it's a very narrow road. So making a U-turn with a Corvette on a grassy road is not that easy. And then speeding to trying to make up the time. And then, of course, at the time, there's a little pebble that gets into your le carter d'huile, the yes, and then so we're losing oil, yes, so we're losing oil, so then when we take our lunch break, they were able to fix it for us. But so now I have like a little protection in front of it so it doesn't happen again, just in case. No, I have a whole lot of stories, from and I have some beautiful pictures too, because usually they take us through very scenic roads, and so
then I would imagine some so scenic, like you say, you rarely think about people in a race having to sort of calculate around the unexpected cow interruption. You don't think of that too much. And in rallies, and I guess I've read more about it than I've ever really actually seen one, though I would like to see one. It's interesting that the navigator has at least as important a job in a different way, sort of a mental sort of way than the driver. Is that correct? I mean,
it is. It's actually a team. It's the driver, the navigator, and the car. The car also has to be. I mean, you really have to be sure that, everything's right, the engine's right. I mean, you can't just like take a car that you casually drive on weekends and expect, to finish the race with it. I mean, it doesn't happen that way. It's tough on cars, those races. And then the navigator, yeah, the coach, she's very important too. I mean, I haven't always done all women, but I like it now because they're getting more and more. I mean, the Princess Rally, when I started it, there were like 20 cars. Now it's like after they hit 100, they refuse entries, but it could be more than 100 entries if they wanted to, because it's become a big thing now, the all-female
That's a
teams.
crowded field.
So,
That's bigger than I had pictured in my mind.
mhm.
Do they cut it off at that number? Is there
They
some?
do at 100. Yes, they do. And I think it has to do with that.
Gosh.
They want to keep it to where it's still, a good time, and you get to talk to everybody and see everybody, as opposed to another race like the Toronto, which is another big French regularity race, and then that one's like they cap at 250 or 300 cars, so it's
Wow.
basically
And multiple stages, I would imagine, on the start. I mean, there's like clumps of 20 cars would be about right. Wow. That's amazing.
Imagine you can't use your iPhone GPS or Waze to tell you how to get to where you're going.
Well, you could always do that. They try to prevent you from doing it. So what they do is they take you through roads where you lose a signal. So if you rely on your GPS or Waze or whatever and you lose the signal, what do? So you have to be prepared.
Back to the compass and the stopwatch.
Yep, that's exactly that's pretty much, yes.
Wow. Do we have any run-ins with would it be called the gendarme, the law enforcement?
Well, the way it is.
You can tell us.
We sometimes do. They well, first of all, they know which roads we're going to be racing on, because that, obviously they have to make it known before the race starts. So they are sometimes on the side of the road waiting for you, to speed. But usually when you go through small towns or villages, they you can't go any more than 30 kilometers an hour, from like the start, to, I mean, the beginning of the village to the end of the village. And so that way they ensure that people are not disturbed, because that's another thing is otherwise you'll have people that will be up in arms against the races, and then they won't be able to hold them anymore. So
right. And I imagine when 100 cars with numbers on the doors come through their little town, it could be super disruptive if people went nuts.
And a 67 Corvette with a big block, I'm sure, makes just a little bit of noise.
Yeah, with the side pipes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of the built-in leaf blower. At least you're doing them a favor when you go through town.
But but it is, it's not, I mean, it's a gentle sound. It's not that, I mean, I've heard of noisier cars than mine, it's just like, boom, 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 boom. I mean, it makes a really cool noise, but it's not very, very loud.
There's nothing like an American V8, a big block V8. They sound different from the small blocks. And then whether it's a Ford or Chevy or even a Dodge, different sounds, but there's a clear sound that comes out of a carbureted big block. That's just a fantastic symphony to the ears.
Absolutely. We are all a little more Eurocentric in our car tastes, although Stephan is building his own big blocked American V8 car, but they still sound about as good as anything automotive ever. It's a great pick.
All right, Steve, you got any questions?
I guess, what's in, I know your dad's collection you still have. Have you added, do you have
some of them?
Yeah, some of them. Did you add, are there cars that you have that are interesting that you just said, I want to have that, just with your varied background? Obviously you have the Corvette, but anything else that's interesting?
No, I mean, some of his cars, it was so vintage that, I don't really enjoy driving a Rolls Royce or a Bentley. I've done it, because sometimes if we have friends or, getting married, or, kids getting married, we'll drive a car to the, and let them have it for the wedding reception. And so I've driven those cars before, but That's not something. I mean, if we were not to keep those, I really wouldn't mind. But I don't want to let go of the Austin Healey. I don't want to get go of the Maserati. I don't Ghibli. You know, I mean, there's a couple that we really want to keep because we do get to drive them when we get together, and so all the kids get together. They don't have cars. Although one of my nephews did get one of the BMWs that my dad had. And he drives that around.
Didn't your dad have a Mercedes 600?
The 600 we sold though. The same thing,
Wow.
So for listeners, the Mercedes 600 was the Mercedes limousine that was the favorite vehicle of despots, murderers, and Idi Amin had one. But it's just the coolest Mercedes limousine ever. And I think my parents rode around. They ride around Paris going to dinner and the thing. I mean,
Oh, I remember when I was young, I took my parents to the airport. We were down in the south of France, and my dad had the car, and they were running late. And he says, well, okay, would somebody drop us off at the airport? And I'm like, okay. And I had to drive around the Mercedes 600 in those narrow little streets, in a southern town in France. You just imagine. Okay, so I got and then get to the airport. Now, no, typically you can't park the car like right in front of the building. But when they saw this car pulling up, there was police there. And I go, no, sure, that's okay. And so I dropped them off right in front of the terminal,
Wow.
It was really cool.
It was called the Grocer, and absolutely one of the great cars of all time.
Mm-hmm.
It still looks beautiful today. But so do your like the Quattroporte.
Mm-hmm.
It's aged very well. Those are all the cars. Your dad had really good taste.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was I guess my brother would tell you about them because he's the one who takes care of all those cars. They're all in Belgium right now. But there was an Aston Martin too. I mean, what else did he have?
Stephan had a Bugatti.
Yeah, he had Bugattis too, but he sold those before moving to Belgium. But
Carole, here in this country, the younger generations are less interested in cars than we are. And certainly I have 3 boys, and none of them are really interested in cars, and it's kind of a shame. Do you see this race that you've won so many times and races like it sparking an interest in young French women?
Well, I do because I mean, in that particular race, to have like 100 entries, it's not. There's a lot of young women, in their 30s, who just you just have to have enough money to have a car or to be able to rent one at least, to race. But and when you go to car shows and trade shows, there's a lot of younger people too. So I would say yes.
I'd have to say, just imagine a little French girl, comes out from her house in a little village, and here come 100 cars, including the '67 Vet, and they're driven by women. I mean, that has to be so inspirational. First of all, not only are just cool cars, but it's all women, and it's not what you typically would see driving one of these cars. So I think it's got to be an amazing inspiration to young women. And then Carole, as a CEO of her company, is an inspiration to young women as well in France in leadership positions.
We sponsor also some young girls, who want to race. I mean, there's one. She follows me on Facebook. She's funny, because she wanted to enter a race and have the money to it, So the company sponsored her, and now she's an engineer, I mean, and she's working. I forget which company she's working for because she did work for Mercedes for a while, then switch over to another company. But
that's interesting. I was wondering, and I'm not surprised at all that you've used your expertise and your past experience to help either coach or encourage others. Do you find yourself ever doing that like in a personal way? Do people reach out to you and say, tell me how you won this thing 6 times in a row?
Not really. I mean, I think I'm also part of a women entrepreneur group. And so, you go around telling your stories and how, it's not that difficult to be an entrepreneur, it's just like it's more a mindset than anything. And then when you tell a bit about your story, because same thing, people ask me, okay, so you're a woman in a man's world, because obviously it's 55 people, but there's only 15 women in my company. I'm trying to get more in. I mean, I do have 2 women engineers, but it's still hard, in the mechanical industry. You don't really get too many women. And so I said, well, my connection to the people that work for me was the cars. And I didn't know about that. Well, first of all, I'm the daughter of two, of an engineer, the granddaughter of the founder of the company. I'm not technical, I'm a finance major. And then here I am trying to run the company. And then, so I entered the race, didn't say anything. And after winning, I come back. And then, so one of the guys comes up to me and says, so when are you going to bring the car so that we can see it? When are you going to pop the hood so we can take a look at the engine? And, from that day on, that was my connection to them.
Perfect.
And so, and so word spreads, and then I'm not sure how it is here in the States, but in France, I'm in my little area, my company's well known, there's a lot of networking going on and everybody belongs to these networks. So you get to know people and people know about your history. And then, and that's how word spreads really.
Well,
And
since
so,
you sponsored that young lady that you said that wanted to get into racing, you may have a fourth female engineer before too long. That's wonderful. That's good, and I can imagine your public position does help you sort of spread the word and represent the cause of what's going on behind the scenes, not just what you're building, but in mechanical bits, but what you're building as far as reputation and interest and inspiration.
That's fantastic. It's I think anything I can do also to help women. I don't know. It's just I think there's we're very complementary, men and women. And in businesses you need both. I'm not like an all female or all male type. But I think women too often do not want to. I don't know. Take the. Like be in the front row, be the center of attention, or not enough anyway. So, anything I can do to help them, get there.
Well, I know something you could do to help us. Stephan has developed an interest in competitive driving. So if you could please coach him, you could help him out there because he's a little bit of an embarrassment to the COC team here. And, we need him to up his game a little bit.
Yeah, 6 championships may be hard. I don't have that many years left.
Yeah, I would just say, Carole, that on a personal note, I'm sure you're having more of an impact with your business and people who see you than you know. I grew up in a family that was very unusual. I'm a lot older now; it's common, but when I was a kid, it's very unusual to live in a family where the mother made the money. But that's what I did. My mom was a doctor back when very, very few women were doctors. So she had a big impact on a lot of younger women and girls who would look at her and say, wait a second, I can do this too. You don't have to be a man. That kind of thing makes a big impact, bigger than you might even think.
Girl power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, is that about it? We got time? Do you want to do how long we've been? We got a little more time, or you want to do the car collector thing, or any other questions you might have for Carole?
No, I specifically didn't add anything on after because I was really interested to hear Carole's story. And Carole, I'll just say that the racing, it's a hobby, it's fun, it's interesting, but in life, there's more to it than that. And I think the fact that, like I said, you're leading a company and inspiring women to do more of that, take leadership roles, that's to me even more interesting. But my gosh, a 67 Big Lot Corvette in France, I just think unbelievable.
Well, you guys come to Paris and I'll let you drive it.
If I can get the keys to that Ghibli, I'll be on the next plane. Carole, I tell you, but one last point. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the American who spells his name in a French way. So I believe he has some French blood in his background. Dick Barber was on this call, and he's competed at Le Mans multiple times. Huge name in Porsche racing, and Steve wisely understood that his entrepreneurial endeavors, in which he did fantastically well, and his racing endeavors were very much how he lived his life, because it's not just that you know how to drive good and that your navigator can correctly quote the turn or the seconds on the watch. We know that it requires discipline, organization, goal setting, an understanding, and perfect, flawless communication, not just in the way it attaches itself to your right foot and your right hand shifting and gas pedals, but just how you apply yourself during that. So we know that that's a bigger goal that you set for yourself. And it's just unbelievable that you've won it that many times. And I'm not surprised that you would apply what you've learned in business and in entrepreneurship to your racing. So a big inspiration.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm not sure I'm that inspirational, but thank you.
Absolutely. Well, just inspire Stephan to give him a couple of tips. I think it'll
Some
go well.
tips.
I need some help.
All right, Stephan.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. And finally, we got Carole on the show. She doesn't like to brag on herself, and I'm so glad that I was able to finally get her on the show because her accomplishments really are extraordinary. She's running the company and racing, and then driving a big block in France. I mean, everything's just so cool, and she's been so successful and a very huge part of our lives, my family's lives, and we're going to continue that. And it's all part of the car story, and it's very intertwined. So like, listen, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.